have a personal opinion. I guess I'm kind of like most of the people, a little apathetic.
They did what they believed is right.
Well, it's kind of shirking the responsibilities of your government. That's what I feel.
And why did the subject amnesty come up anyway, you know?
Those that have run from the war shouldn't be granted any amnesty.
A lot of boys went over there to Vietnam and didn't know what the war was all about. I don't blame them for leaving.
Yeah, well, I think they should do their duty to serve their country.
Well, I think it should be granted. I think it should be granted now.
It's man's sort of obligation, you know, to his country. They've given him a lot, and he's got to put forth something to show that he cares.
What does the word amnesty mean to you?
To me, it would be punishment because they didn't go and do their duty.
Basically, I think in terms of amnesty, it's for those people who have fled the country.
Oh, I suppose forgiveness.
An amnesty really is just a non-act. It's declining, the government declining to invoke the power it has to punish for some antisocial act that's been defined as a crime. And invoking that, or not invoking that power in favor of a whole class of citizens as opposed to a single citizen. The problem we have now is that when people hear the word amnesty, they think forgiveness, or they think, well, typically forgiveness, that I'm not going to punish because I forgive you. But that's not what amnesty means. All amnesty means is I'm not going to punish. It doesn't mean I forgive.
Amnesty is not new to America. There have been more than 25 war-related amnesties affecting deserters, rebels, and war resistors. The circumstances surrounding them were varied. From 1807 to 1868, presidential amnesties were granted on 9 separate occasions to deserters, on the condition that they return to duty. People who took up arms against the country have also been pardoned. We asked a Civil War historian about one of these amnesties.
I understand the first amnesty that was offered at the time of the Civil War is in December of 1863 in a proclamation by President Lincoln. And this was an offer of general amnesty to any in the Confederacy who would take, in essence, an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Lincoln was primarily motivated by a concern for reconciliation, I guess is the term that would be used today.
This spirit of reconciliation also motivated President Johnson to grant a universal and unconditional amnesty to all former rebels. More recently, following both World Wars, those convicted of war resistance received pardons. After World War I, amnesty was granted on a group basis by President Roosevelt. After World War II, men were pardoned on a case-by-case basis by President Truman. Resistance during the Vietnam War was for ethical as well as religious reasons. We asked Dr. Clausen and Jeremy Mott how they view the role of conscience in our society.
If we recognize ethics, or an ethic, that we live in an ethical world, or that we are ethical creatures, that we recognize right and wrong, let's put it that way, then we have to recognize that a man must follow his conscience. And we also have to recognize, I suppose as a matter of fact, that sometimes what a man's conscience will tell him to do will vary from what his state tells him to do. When he's in that position, he's, in a sense, in a dilemma. If he obeys his conscience, he is subject to sanctions by the state for disobeying the law, the rule of the state. If he obeys the state, he is subject to whatever personal sanctions he feels from disobeying his own conscience. So it's a bit of a dilemma, but only in this sense, that either way he goes, he's going to be subject to some sort of sanction.
All you can say is that there are laws and laws, you know. There are laws that are absolutely essential. A civilized society doesn't allow people to go around murdering people. There are laws that are terrible. A draft law promotes a spirit of murder and killing. It's I found that I couldn't live by the draft law and at the same time live by my conceptions of decency or live with myself as a Christian. And so I decided I would break the draft law. I broke it openly, no secrecy. It's nothing new, this kind of law breaking for conscience sake. I don't see that people should get all excited about it. The society isn't going to fall apart. It may be changed for the better, you hope. To those of us who felt, as I felt and do feel, that the war was a terrible disservice to the country. Those of us who opposed the war and tried to stop it and refused to participate in it, we felt, I still feel, that we were doing the most useful kind of service to the country.
How one approaches service to his country and obedience to his conscience depends upon the importance he places on each. While working with a panel of university and community personnel, members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and other individuals, we noted their views on this question.
You just can't say, I'm going to object to this, or I'm going to use my conscience, and determine the way you're going to live, irrespective of what effect it will have on the rest of the public. Because then we would have a society, we'd have absolute anarchy. Now, if you're going to live by your conscience, then you also have to suffer the consequences under our law, under our form of government, and under our society.
Our country is more important than any one individual could ever hope to be. Faced with the possibility of having to serve our country, we had a choice to make, that is to go or not to go, and to pay a penalty.
Every man or every able-bodied citizen should has a moral obligation to serve his country at least 2 years.
He can stay and take what's coming to him if you don't want to go into the service, or he can leave the country. Now, when a man puts his own selfish reasons ahead of his own country, he shouldn't belong in it. I don't have too much more to say about that.
That everybody should put their part towards this whole thing and not take off and run away. If you run, you should stay where you went.
I don't feel that he could really be that trusted, because if he's going to cop out in the country, then he's going to cop out in you.
If I'm not allowed to do what I believe, then there's something wrong there, you know. Just because I criticize some of the things that happen in this country doesn't mean I don't love it.
What kind of things brought you to change your mind to a point where you wanted to get out of the Marines?
It was really a long process. Exactly. The first time in my life I asked, I was trying to justify what I was doing. And when I started asking myself a lot of questions, I didn't like some of the answers, and I really was having a difficult time. I decided the only thing to do was to just let them know that I wasn't going to be a part of it any longer, and then I knew that I'd have to go through, be punished or whatever. I knew I'd probably do some time.
How do you feel about having a bad conduct discharge?
I'm proud of what it represents. I felt that I did what I had to do.
I know that you're an individual who thinks about and reacts to national issues and policies, and so how do you see your duty to your country?
Well, I myself did serve my country during World War II, and I felt it was something that the country asks you to do, and there are certain times that you have to do things even though you don't agree with them all the way. I feel that if they didn't serve their country in some way or other, then they do not deserve to be a member of this country. In other words, if they had rules to follow, and if they didn't obey the rules, there was a thing that they could have done that they didn't have to go to jail for it, but they still could have served their country in some other way. But I think that if they broke the law, they're going to have to suffer the consequences. When it comes to a war and it comes to national policy, the average person doesn't know all the answers. And I think you have to believe in your country and do what's asked of you, whether you think it's right or wrong.
What were the ingredients that led you to make your decision to come here over 4 years?
One was a desire not to participate in the war, obviously. I had seen a good deal about it, read about it, talked about it, and decided that I didn't want any part in it. I also had to think about whether I was a complete pacifist or not, whether I might want to try for a conscientious objection status. I considered that for a number of years, considered applying for CO status, never did. There were other things on my mind as well. I didn't think I wanted to have any real part of the military because of its stance in the world, because of what it was doing in Vietnam. I thought a bit about prison. I don't think I had the constitution to put up with prison, certainly not a long-term sentence. I did a good deal of thinking about Canada, coming to a different country, leaving the country where I had lived, as a difficult thing, but what seemed to me an honorable thing, at least for my conscience. But the decision wasn't really easy to come, because there are other things to consider. It's not just that your family and your friends are all in the States and you grow up with loyalty in the States. It's a matter of whether you are doing the right thing, whether you have the right to, under what sort of circumstances you do have the right to refuse to obey an order from your government, what obligations you have to your government, what obligations you don't have, what obligations you have to yourself. And it was a difficult thing to sort out. In the end, obviously, since I'm here, I decided that this was one situation when I had to disobey, when I had to refuse an order that my government had given me.
Should an amnesty be granted? If so, for whom? People usually think of the men who are in exile. However, an amnesty could include men who have received less than honorable discharges during the Vietnam era, men who are federal felons because of their resistance to the war, and men who have deserted from the military. Depending on whose figures are used, as few as 7,000 or as many as 1 million men could be affected. We asked some who would benefit from an amnesty and others who are deeply concerned with the issue how they felt.
Now, it isn't my decision alone. I mean, I'm not here myself as a draft dodger, but for me, if it were just draft dodgers who were allowed to go back completely free, but deserters were given some kind of punishment, I would think long and hard before I would go back. We came here and to make a moral statement, really, and it's something that I feel that I would have to live by.
I think maybe there should be an amnesty that says you can come home, all of you.
How about somebody like yourself, though, that deserted from the Army? I mean, you've also got that hanging over you.
Yeah. Well, I consider that I gave them a chance, you know, and the waste of the Army, how it affected men's lives, was very destructive.
So I would feel that these fellows that did desert from the service, for one, will have to answer to the service. And those who left the country so they would not be drafted are going to have to answer to their country.
You feel amnesty should be granted?
For general amnesty, we're definitely against it as far as the veterans of foreign wars. There are some that just took off and ran. They just flew the coop and ran because of the draft or their own personal feelings. There are others that were charged maybe unjustly by the military that didn't stand up to a trial. Rather than take the trial, they ran. So they didn't give themselves the opportunity of due course or due process of law. Maybe there's a few that can come back now without, let's say, serving any time. They definitely should not come back without any penalty at all. We're definitely against that.
If we were to go back under terms of amnesty as we hear them talked about now, it means admitting that maybe what we did was something wrong, and at least at this point in time, I'm not prepared to admit that the decision I personally made was wrong. We're just very happy here, and in our personal situation, amnesty is probably not as much a concern as it would be possibly to some other individuals. There's no question that this whole situation that we've become involved in is
much more difficult for instance, our relatives.
It's really been hard for them, more so than for us. And
Probably because they have difficult social conditions to adapt to. It's not easy being the parent of a draft dodger, for instance, in a small town.
But a change is coming about even in them, whereas when we first left, even they were upset with us, as well as the people around them being upset and that affecting them. Now the change is coming about that they're beginning to realize that maybe we did take the right step.
Of course, this was a very great shock to us when he decided to leave, because possibly maybe we didn't want to face it.
About 2 weeks before he left, he told us that he was going to do something, that he was not going to accept this call. That was when his date to report came up. And at first, our reaction was, although we didn't want him to have to go, we felt that because others had to go, that if he were called, that he should go too.
But it did affect our family because we knew that he was alone, and was he going to be able to find employment? Was he going to be able to have enough money to live adequately? And so we worried a lot the first year.
There was one boy in Sheboygan who came home for his grandmother's funeral, and he was arrested at the cemetery after the funeral. So we know that we wouldn't want him to take a chance like that.
Ms. Henderson, you mentioned that your view of amnesty has changed since Bill's come back. Would you want to comment about that again?
Oh, we're so grateful to have Bill back that I think I'd like to see all the parents as happy as we, if they have sons in Canada, or the wives that were left here while their husbands left. I'd like to see those boys come back if there were some way of doing it so that we wouldn't be just granting just a general amnesty.
What should you do with amnesty? Should you just say, all right, guys, I'm sorry about it, about the mix-up of feelings, come on back and we'll shake hands? That'll, I'm sure, lead to a lot of hard feelings on a lot of people. And I don't think it's the right approach. Something the people who are against amnesty feel that they ran out of the country, and that there's some sort of retribution should come from them. With the extent of it, I personally don't want any retribution. I personally would be happy to have them back. I bear no animosities towards anybody, really. But I think maybe if they get back military service, government service, if they can't take the military, get back, and there's a lot of social type work, Peace Corps and Vista and those lines, where they could put service into the country, and it's a sacrifice. But then, of course, the military is a sacrifice too, especially those that didn't come back.
With regard to the deserters, draft dodgers, and the hiders, they have to be tried individually because they're not all equally guilty. They are not all equally innocent either. They should stand before a court of their peers and have that court of the peers decide what their penalty should be.
Do find fault with a particular procedure of judging each case on an individual basis. I disagree with that simply because the person that is not intellectually sophisticated, the person that is not articulate, is not going to pass the test.
Many men were originally denied conscientious objector status for similar reasons. Some did not know their rights, and others faced local draft boards that did not properly interpret the law.
Generally in the past, a case-by-case study of an individual's position just has not worked.
So when you talk about amnesty, to me, I can't disagree with what they did, and I can't agree with what they did, but what I can do is make aware to what they should be talking about giving amnesty to. They should be talking about giving these people a chance that did commit themselves, regardless, if they wanted to or not, they did go there and fight. They did go into the service. So I think they should be talking about amnesty or clemency or releasing of these bad discharges.
How do you feel about amnesty for resistors?
Before we ever, entertain the thought of amnesty for anybody, we will have to restore the lives of those men who are still here or who are a part of the system now, whose lives have been disordered by virtue of the fact of their participation in the war. You got to go back to the root of your problem. See, the minority veteran during the Vietnam conflict received 47% of all those less than honorable discharges.
The real difference between somebody who's left service after entering to serve and somebody who refused to serve in the first place is a difference in timing. It's a difference in terms of when did the person decide that he couldn't be a fighter anymore. Some people made this decision earlier.
Well, I enlisted in 1968 for a 4-year term. I thought at the time that Vietnam was a good thing. I got into basic training AIT and started to see some of the guys coming back from Nam. So that kind of got me to start thinking about what was going on. If what we were doing was so right over there, why were people coming back with these huge guilt complexes about what they did? Finally, I saw Vietnam as being morally as well as legally wrong. I decided to go AWOL, which I did. I took the UD discharge and was discharged from the Army. Since that time, I've kind of come to realize what it means to get a UD discharge. It's the Army's way of punishing you for the rest of your life for what they felt was wrongdoings on your part while you're in the military. Makes it extremely difficult for you to get any other than the most menial type of job. It cuts off any GI benefits that you might have possibly had. Like for myself, I'd spent 3 years in the military and conformed to what the military wanted, which I feel should have been worth something.
And what is your opinion about granting amnesty?
For it to be acceptable to me and as being the correct thing to do, it would make this country do something that it's never done before, and that's admit it's wrong. It was very wrong in Vietnam. And saying to the people that for whatever reasons they did not go into the military or in the military and left, say to them, you were right and we were wrong, and in some way even say thank you for maybe opening our eyes a little bit to what was going on.
As a Vietnam veteran who served in the Green Berets, how do you feel about amnesty?
As far as a general amnesty goes, I'm against it. I think that it has to be done on a individual basis, depending upon why the individual left, and if his reasons are valid or not.
When a man deserts, what should the consequences be?
Of a deserter from the military.
Right.
Well, if a man makes a contract and he breaks it, and he knows what the penalties for breaking it, then it's his own choice. And if he's a man, he can face the consequences if he gets caught. He shouldn't cry about it, I don't think.
What about somebody who's now a federal felon? He went to prison. He's lost many of his civil rights. What about an amnesty to restore some of these rights? How do you feel about that?
I'm greatly in favor of it. Any man who has gone to jail and has served his time, he has the right of any citizen, I feel. Because if he hasn't earned those rights, well then, why lie about it and say that he has paid his debt to society? I have respect for any man who does what he thinks is right. So if a man chooses not to go in the military, and he does that legally, like what some have done, and then gone to jail for it, I think it's wrong to go to jail for it. But that's the laws of the country, as they are right now. And if you don't leave, you have to change them. But you just can't run out on them, if you care about the country.
Why did you choose to stay and refuse induction?
Well, I ruled out the possibility of going to Canada or Sweden or the variety of other countries that were accepting people who were resisting induction at that point, because I felt that the primary responsibility of somebody living in a country is to change the policies of that government if in fact they don't agree with them. and I felt that I could more forcefully and actively change him if I stayed in the country and refused induction.
How would an amnesty affect you?
If it were a general amnesty, I assume that would mean that I was automatically pardoned. And in that case, it would eliminate all of the restrictions that are placed on, convicted felons. The kind of restrictions that I can't vote, I can't hold public office, I can't own or possess firearms, and in some states I can't operate a motor vehicle, can't have a driver's license. Bonding, I understand, is restricted. In other words, you can't be bonded for those jobs where that's required.
If an amnesty were granted, what do you think it would mean to America?
An amnesty could serve the purpose of amelioration or reconciliation. I think there's a very great need for this sort of thing in our society because I think there was a very basic failure on the part of government in the 1960s that I think a justification for amnesty because of this peculiar or special circumstance can be made in this situation, whereas it probably could not be made so easily with respect to earlier situations. I do think that this should be done, though, in such a way so as to not give the impression that at any time in the future just any individual citizen or a group of citizens could decide on their own that they will not support the government for this, that, or another reason.
Politically, it would not be expedient. Now, do you think that the president is going to try to divide the country to that extent? I think that if he were to declare a blanket amnesty today, the country would be more divided and more seriously divided than it ever was over the Vietnam War in the first place. That's how serious I think that would be. But I would like to clarify one thing. I am not against amnesty. I'm 100% opposed to a blanket amnesty. We were at war. There was a law governing conscription, if you want to call it that. And if these individuals decided that they wanted to break that law, then they were taking the law into their own hands. And I say that they must be punished. And I don't think that this country is going to ever come to the point of just having a blanket amnesty. I can't see that in the foreseeable future, not in our time.
What I hope for is a good debate, a strong debate on amnesty with the various points of views presented. I think that the debate itself might be more important than the decision that is made on amnesty. The whole question of a person's responsibility to his country, where the line is drawn, where it stops, where his responsibility to himself is greater, under which circumstances it is greater, are the sort of questions that an amnesty has to come to terms with.
The question of what to do about amnesty can only be resolved by the people of the United States. It will not be settled easily. Consequently, as the debate goes on, each of us has the responsibility to seek out and find his own answer to this complex issue.